Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free, available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and this is an extra video with Tom Vanderford, who is here for his weekly segment. And Tom, fall camp is over. What's your takeaways from it?
My main takeaways is the offense is going to be dynamic, and I think the defense is going to surprise some people. I think we'll see. Of course, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say this, but I think we'll see some fairly vanilla stuff for Mercer. I'm hopeful that if we get up big, that we put Howard in, get him a few reps, and just use our Sanders as a, emergency replacement if Dart were to, God forbid, get hurt. And that's kind of how I want to see it progress throughout the year. But that's just my point. The defense, I think it'll be fairly generic. I don't think a lot of stunts and things like that will be shown against Mercer. But at the same time, what I'm really looking forward to is seeing how these transfers gel. I feel very good about the defensive line and the linebacking core. I feel good about the corners. I want to see how the secondary reacts. I think our weakest point on our team right now is safety as far as depth. And I just want to see those guys show out. I don't think people understand, they talk about Aiden Williams and they talk about Franklin and they talk about, and I'm sorry, I have chemo brain, so sometimes I forget, but the awesome kid from La Tech, they talk about those kids, and I think they're forgetting people like Jalen Knox, and they're forgetting people like Braylon Brown. And we've got so much Watkins. We've got so much depth. I think that loses everybody's, people forget that. And I'm glad the national folks have forgotten it, honestly. I think State and Ole Miss are going to be better than a lot of the prognosticators are giving them, But I'm really excited to see the depth. That's what I want to see in the first game. I want to see everybody play. Well, nothing against Mercer, but if you're playing Mercer and you're an SEC team, your 4 deep should get reps. And I'd like to see that. I really would.
It wasn't too awful long, or even the good teams that Ole Miss has had over the last 2 decades, heck, over the last 4 decades. Ole Miss was always one player away from the season being essentially wrecked. Mm. And you look at this year, it's like God forbid, even if Jackson Dart went down, you could win games with Spencer Sanders. You could win games with Walker Howard. And I just don't remember seeing a team like this, Tom.
I don't either. We've always been, we've always had depth problems in certain areas. I mean, I can remember when we were like, oh gosh, we can't lose a corner because, there's a big drop off from the 1s to the 2s. And I can remember saying that a couple of years ago about the DL. And, it's taken a while to build what they've built. And I'm maybe I'm, not maybe, I am a homer, but I am ecstatic about our depth. You could lose. Well, for example, Prince is having a little bit of trouble. That would have killed me a couple of years ago because Prince is a really good player, but we've got more really good cornerbacks. So there's just little stuff like that. Somebody gets in trouble and has to sit out or gets hurt, gets nicked up. We've got a lot of depth pieces. And, I'm personally very proud of an article I read about Ashanti Cistrunk. I mean, here's a 5th-year kid from Louisville, Mississippi, good kid, know his family well. And he's taken all of his knowledge that he's learned in that 5 years and doing everything he can to help Suntarine Perkins succeed. I think that's really, really a good story there.
Yeah, and Suntarian's nickname, by the way, is Git, and that is the most Raleigh thing ever.
Yeah.
It just is. If you're from that area, you understand like Smith, Simpson County, that absolutely fits it perfectly.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, before we move on, McGee and Mendenhall being combined into one school is one of the dumbest things the state of Mississippi has ever done. I'm just saying that right now. That absolutely is ridiculous.
I agree.
So I'll let you know, like I asked David Eckert this, and he was on the show last night, and he answered Caden Lee and I forget who he said defensively, but the question was which player, which isn't like a known thing, a common name that you hear about breakout, which player is going to surprise against Mercer?
I think he's right on Caden Lee. And, I overlooked him when I was talking about all of our wide receiver depth. He's an interesting player. I've heard he's done really good in fall camp. Of course, Lane Kiffin went and saw him a lot last year. Just like Lane Kiffin sat in the freezing cold by himself watching Quinshon Judkins play football. So Lane saw something that maybe some folks didn't. So I'm glad that we've got him. I'm glad that he's a good piece of our offense. And on defense, to be completely honest with you, I hope that we have a safety show up, that can help with depth. Now, the kid from Miami that's gonna play, or at least he got cleared, he's a safety / corner, or is he a corner?
He's a corner. But the problem with Chris Graves is he was somebody that was kind of a late bloomer and moved over to the defensive side of the ball in high school. So he's still learning how to play that position. They tried to develop him at Miami, and I asked Brian Smith, who is the Locked On recruiting expert, about it, and he's like, no, he didn't get kicked off the team. It's just that kids in South Florida, they don't like waiting. They're just completely impatient. And with him being developed the way he was, he probably didn't like sitting on the scout team. He probably didn't like that stuff. So he moved up here. He followed Kevin Smith back up here because remember, Kevin Smith was in Miami last season. So I wouldn't look for the beginning of the season Chris Graves to make an impact, but he could be on the Otis Reese plan, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. All righty. Well, I just, I did. That's the one thing I worry about, though, is the safety depth.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, what is your worry position on this team?
Yeah, safety depth. I mean, I think we've got more depth than we've ever had before everywhere. But I just worry about the safety depth and the reps of those people back there. I mean, I know we've got Ladarius Tennyson, and I know we've got
Tennyson's been moved to linebacker.
Yeah, I know we got I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Cool. And I know we got Isheem Young. But those guys, like you said, they were more box safeties anyway. So I just want to see if we've got some, real safeties.
I think you can look at the starters at safety. And tomorrow, our Friday's show, I said tomorrow's show because we're recording this on Thursday, but tomorrow morning's Locked On Ole Miss podcast, or Friday mornings, is about the safeties being a worrisome position for me. That is what I'm worried about. But there's 3 players that you need to look at. Now, we have to replace AJ Finley, and replacing AJ Finley, I don't think people realize how good he's been. And I think John Saunders is going to try and do his best there, but he's a cornerback playing basically center field. So he's going to have some growing pains. And then you have TJ Young, the transfer from FAU. I think he's going to be on the field. All the people try to pronounce it Teja or whatever. It's TJ. It's TJ Young. It's just spelled funny. And then you have Dejon Anthony from Liberty. And I think those are kind of the leaders in the clubhouse in those three safety positions. But it's one of those things where Ole Miss's safeties and who they've been recruiting to were tweeners that were basically kind of like small linebackers.
Right.
Those are the players that were playing that position. So Pete Golding comes in and goes from playing zone coverage, which Chris Partridge was doing, which didn't require much moving around, to man coverage, which requires athletes. And you have Pete Golding going out and trying to find corners that aren't quite SEC level, but are good for the middle of the field. That's the Dejon Anthony, the TJ Young, those type players to play these safety positions. We are fine out at corner. I have no problem with that corner depth. But the safety depth, if we have one injury, it gets dicey.
Exactly. Yeah, those are my thoughts exactly.
I think Ashim's going to end up in center field as the backup to John Saunders. I think John Saunders is going to be on the fifth defensive back from time to time, playing slot corner, kind of like I guess the Saints do all that. It's kind of in vogue to be 4-2-5 in the NFL right now, and they're doing it with these slot corners, and you're going to see that a little bit from Pete Golding, I think, as well.
I'm excited. It's going to be really nice. You know, I'm glad, Tennyson I did not know he'd been moved to linebacker, but I'm glad he did because he's a sure tackler. He's quick. He's not a big guy, but he can compensate for that.
Yeah. The problem for Tennyson and for Ishim Young to a little bit lesser degree is they're both basically tweeners. And that's what made the defense that we played last year so good, is because they found a way to use those tweeners and to make them effective. But now, once you're wanting to play a normal style defense, those guys go back to being tweeners again, and not really big enough to play linebacker. They're not really good enough cover people to play in the secondary. So, I mean, you have to find people to play those spots. So anyway, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Tommy, thank you for coming on the show, man. And I can't wait till next week is game week. And we're going to do it.
Oh, man. I'm pumped.
Tom will be Friday night, I think, moving forward. Everybody's gotten used to having him on Sunday night, but I want him before the game. So the tones of Tom Vanderford, you'll be able to catch Friday night moving forward.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. I hope everybody has a good weekend. It is game week. Hotty toddy.